Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, I'm not going to lie. This week, I thought that preaching on the book of Revelation was a terrible mistake. Because reading this text for today, you might find yourself wondering, well, you're probably wondering several things, but one thing that I would be thinking about is, what point can this possibly have for us today? And that's certainly where I was for much of this week. But then in a moment of desperation, I had an epiphany. I realized that this text discusses one of the oldest and most challenging problems that different religions have to deal with. I know I am not talking about how many licks it takes to get to the middle of a Tootsie Pop. Some of you are old enough to get that. The real question, though, I think that this text deals with is, what is the nature of evil and what is evil's solution? Because our reading for today is permeated with evil. Practically every verse is talking about evil. Now, for some religious folks, some religious traditions, evil isn't really seen as a real thing. Instead, it's kind of like darkness, which isn't a thing in itself. Rather, darkness is the absence of light. So in their thinking, evil is just the absence of goodness. And I certainly have sympathies with that view. But is that really the best way to speak about evil? Does that really match with our experience? Does that really match up with our religious traditions? And that's what I hope to talk about a little bit this morning. This is a reminder for those who haven't been able to quite be with us through this whole journey. The book of Revelation is what's called apocalyptic literature, or just an apocalypse for short. That means unveiling in Greek, hence the English title, Revelation. Apocalyptic literature was written to bring comfort to its particular community. It concerns itself with bad things that are happening now, but it points to God's future victory and the vindication of those who have been persecuted. Apocalyptic literature likes to use certain numbers. 7 is pretty prominent in Revelation, but the numbers 6, 10, and 12 also show up. Last week in chapter 7, we met the 144,000 and the great multitude, those followers of Christ that suffered during the great ordeal. Yet nevertheless, they stood before the throne of God, praising God continuously. Then from chapter 8 to the first half of chapter 11, Revelation talks about more plagues, more famine, more natural disasters. Again, this is all pretty typical for apocalyptic literature. Then in the latter part of chapter 11, just before what we started reading this morning, we meet the dragon. The dragon is, of course, well, it of course represents Satan. And then Revelation recounts what's called the heavenly battle myth. In the heavenly battle myth, God, or a god, depending on which religion is telling the story, has to defeat a powerful chaos monster in order to bring order into the world. In Greek mythology, Zeus had to defeat Typhon. In Babylonian mythology, Marduk had to defeat Tiamat. And in the Old Testament, God has to defeat Rahab or Behemoth, two massive monsters, in order to bring order to the world. In this version in Revelation, Michael, the commander of God's angels, fights and defeats the dragon and throws him down to the earth. Though defeated, the dragon wages war against God's people on earth. Now, a lot of this is strange to our ears, and it's okay not to get all the details, because I think the big picture is what is more important. It is a reminder that evil is real and that God is able to defeat evil. Well, that brings us up to our reading for this morning. In our reading for today, we are introduced to two beasts. The first beast rises out of the sea and is given power and authority from the dragon. The second beast rises out of the earth and functions as the first beast's lieutenant and spokesman. The beasts both wage war on God's people, called saints in this passage. All over the world, people will fall down and worship the first beast. And despite all the awful things this creature says and does, despite all of that, those who will refuse will be killed. All people are required to take the mark of the beast on either their forehead or their right hand. And those who refuse will not be able to buy or sell. They will be excluded from the economy. And that mark, it is a number. And that number is 666. Funny story, 666 is one of the prefixes for Berkeley, California. So when I was a seminary student, my phone number was 666-8660. I thought that was pretty fun. When I talked to Pac Bell about it, they're like, well, do you want a different number? I was like, nah, I'm a seminary student. It's kind of funny. So who are these beasts? And what the heck is going on with this number, 666? So I'll say a few words about the symbolism that is going on in this passage. First, the symbolism of 666. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, the number 7 signifies God's perfection. Well, 6, unfortunately, falls short. It represents imperfection. Also, it can represent human beings, because human beings were, of course, created in Genesis 1's version of the creation story on the 6th day. And having a triple to 666 is kind of a perverse trinity. Kind of like what we'll read about in this text about the dragon, the first beast, and the second beast. They kind of form this unholy trinity. But I need to say something about how ancients in this time wrote their numbers. When we want to write down a number, we have 2 ways to do it. Well, 3 ways if you count Roman numerals, but who can actually read Roman numerals? But we can either write it down in special symbols that we use only for numbers. We call them digits, 1, 2, 3, etc., right? Or we can write them out like we do on checks. Checks, this is the thing that old people use to write money to people when they don't use cash or a credit card. It's something even I do, because I'm technically old too. So you can either write it in digits in English, or you can write it out. 1,000, right? We can do that either way. But in Greek and Hebrew, those languages didn't have special symbols to represent numbers like we do today. Sure, they could write out the words if they wanted to, but they usually didn't do that, just like we don't usually do that. Instead, letters in those 2 languages did double duty. Every letter in Greek and every letter in Hebrew also had a numerical value assigned to it. So alpha, beta, and gamma, the first 3 letters of the Greek alphabet, were 1, 2, 3. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, the first 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, were 1, 2, 3. So any word in Greek or any word in Hebrew could also be read as a number. Any name could have a number. And it just so happens that the letters in the name Nero Caesar, that is Emperor Nero, that notorious persecutor of Christians, guess what number his letters add up to? 666. So most scholars think, at least in its original context, this is a veiled reference to Emperor Nero. But of course, the writer doesn't come out and say that outright. And so we have wrestled with this text ever since. And in fact, some Christians are sure that that first beast is someone alive today, and they determined to figure out who it is. Many different historical figures have been identified as the beast. Now, other places in Revelation refer to the first beast as a term that you probably have all heard more than the beast, Antichrist. And the second beast is also referred to as his false prophet. So the first beast, second beast, Antichrist, false prophet, referring to the same figures. And some fundamentalists were very uneasy when Ronald Wilson Reagan was elected president, since each one of his names has 6 letters. But on the other side of the political spectrum, some were convinced that Bill Clinton was the beast. Still others considered other possibilities. My personal favorite is Jack Van Impe, that late-night guy, televangelist who would look at different biblical passages in the newspaper. He decided that King Juan Carlos of Spain was the Antichrist. That's kind of my personal favorite, because how many of you even think about Juan Carlos of Spain? And of course, the Left Behind series of books had a character named Nicolae Carpathia, who was a fictional European politician who was the Antichrist in that book. You gotta know that this is something that Christians have been doing for nearly 2,000 years, trying to figure out, who could this beast, who could this Antichrist be? And I suspect that we will keep doing it for a long time into the future. So my first point, is not to fall into the trap of thinking the end is near and that such and such is the Antichrist. That's an old trope that Christians have been throwing around for 2,000 years. And remember what it is that Jesus says about those who predict the end is come. Don't fall for it. But my main point is a little bit more existential. And that is that evil is real and it has real power. Now, I don't mean to suggest that the devil is literally real. Some of you no doubt believe that, others probably not so much. But what I mean here, however, is that evil is a force in our lives, in our world. It has the power to shape reality. Evil in the book of Revelation is a reference to the Roman Empire, this vast bureaucracy, this powerful state that could crush and maim and destroy life. That's an example of a systemic evil. It's bigger than any one individual. It's not something an individual can even fight against. Sometimes the best we can hope to do is just to endure it because it is so powerful. They are powers unto themselves, and they have to be dealt with accordingly. But we humans don't really have the tools to deal with that kind of evil, because we ourselves are shaped by it. We ourselves are wrapped up in it, and none of us are 100% good or 100% evil. It blinds us all, especially in our own evil. And that's what the early church fathers called sin. Not so much the evil actions that we carry out, but the evil power that holds us under its control. And we can't free ourselves. But that is where the good news of the gospel comes into play. Because God, in God's great loving mercy, entered into this world, became human, and joined with us in the struggle for justice and peace. God's incarnation, that is, becoming human, transformed our reality into something new, something better, something improved. And through Jesus' example, through his healing power, through his life, through his death and resurrection, God made this happen. Jesus broke the power of evil and opened up a space for us to live a new way. The book of Revelation is a strange one. This is probably not even the strangest passage that you would read in this book. This is probably, whoever chose these passages to represent the book of Revelation was kind of careful not to pick the weirdest ones. This is pretty weird, but it's not the weirdest one. The real point of the book is about giving hope to a struggling community. It's demonstrating that yes, evil is real, it is powerful, it is able to do all sorts of things, to twist lives, maim lives, destroy lives, crush people. And it is powerful. But the reminder here is that God is yet more powerful. God is able to take that evil into God's self and transform it. Death is turned into life. maiming and destruction are turned into power of healing. That is the redemptive power of God in Jesus Christ. The enemy, the one who seeks to kill you, becomes the beloved sibling, the brother or sister, the friend. That transforming power is what we as the church represent. It is the power that we help bring into this world. It is the power that has sponsored us and brought us here together. It is the power that sends us out into this hurting world. There is a lot of evil out there. There's a lot of bad things that are happening. There's evil within us too. We do bad things too. But the power of God can defeat the power of evil. And for we as followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to endure knowing that God will achieve victory in the end.